Hi everyone, thank you for joining. I'm going to give us about 30 seconds to allow everyone to join the webinar before I get started. So sit tight for the next few seconds and we'll get started. Okay, hopefully most people will have joined. If anyone joins us late or anyone isn't able to attend who you know would be coming along, we are going to record this webinar, and we're going to share it along with the slides and an FAQ over the next couple of days. So please don't worry if you miss any of it or have to drop off. We will be able to send you the recorded webinar. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm Lili, I'm the head of customer success here at Constructionline, and my goal is to support the team of customer success managers that work with you. And one of the major things that they focus on is helping you to achieve your objectives and overcome your challenges. In this webinar, I will be focusing on one of the most common challenges that we hear from our customers, which is around streamlining the supply chain management side, both when it comes to sourcing new suppliers, but also in managing the existing supply chain. Now, there are quite a lot of you on the webinar today, so I have a few members of my team ready to answer any questions that you may have. So please feel free to ask any questions within the Q&A area of the tool. They will be helping me out as I go through the presentation. They'll be answering any questions. So if there's something that I mentioned that you want to know more about, pop it in the chat and someone will answer it. If for any reason we're not able to answer every question, we will follow up with you and make sure that you do get responses to them. So traditionally, Constructionline has had a bit of a two-sided approach to the way in which we work on the buyer side and supplier side. And when we talk about buyers, what we've historically meant is the main contractors. But we very well know that construction is not as simple as just one buyer and one supplier and a single project. We know that there's multiple layers of subcontractors delivering all kinds of work. It's a multi-layered network of suppliers. And the deeper a network is, the more complex it becomes. And this, coupled with the fact that supply chains in construction are not static, and it starts to throw up many problems. Now let's take that first challenge, that first problem in sourcing new suppliers. Now, there may be many reasons why you might need to find a new supplier. You may have won a project in a new area where you don't have an existing supply chain. It may be that your existing suppliers are too busy, they're not able to deliver on the work that you need. It may be that the suppliers are no longer in business. And it may just be that you want to widen that pool of suppliers that you work with so that you tap into a broader selection of skills. It may even be that you now need to have more suppliers that have social value. Now, some of you may only need to do this every so often. But in some cases, and certainly with the customers that I've spoken to, it's a constant activity and it never really stops. So whatever your reason for needing a new supplier, what you want is that supplier to be able to do a good job at a reasonable price. And you want it to be really easy to find those suppliers. And they may seem like quite simple things, but as we all know, it's not as straightforward to find those suppliers. Now, I'd like to just take a moment to describe a scenario, and I want to see whether this resonates with you. Now, let's say you sit in front of your computer and you have a PDF or a Word document open with details of a new project and an outline of the type of supplier or contractor that you need, maybe a location, and you open up Google or Yell, or maybe you have an existing list of suppliers in a procurement system or finance system. And you start from the top, you start from the top link, you find the contact details, pick up the phone, you give that company a ring, and you explain what the project is. That person then turns around to you and says, oh, I'm too busy, they can't do the project, they don't have the right skills, they're not in the right location. Hang up the phone, you go to the next person, and you go through the same exercise. That is a process that I know some of you follow. You waste days in some cases. This is, conversations I've had with suppliers. You waste days trying to find enough suppliers that are interested and able to deliver the work so that you can issue enough tenders so that you can get a good number of quotes in return. It may take a really long time to find enough of those that are available. And that's a real time waste. Now, to me, it's not a great use of your time. And we have introduced recently a new tool called Marketplace Publish that really helps to address that problem. And really what we're looking for with Marketplace is that it saves you that wasted time, and it helps you to find those pre-qualified suppliers that are definitely interested and are capable of delivering that work. So it does the pre-qualification for you. All you then need to do is to make sure that they do it at the right price. So how does it work in principle? So within Constructionline, we have a network of around 60,000 suppliers across the UK, and across construction and across facilities management. Using the existing compliance information that those suppliers complete as part of their verification, and I know a lot of you are suppliers as well, you will have likely completed those verification and that compliance as part of your usage of Constructionline. You're then able to publish expressions of interest to the suppliers you've matched with. Those suppliers will subsequently receive a notification about the expression of interest and then can respond accordingly. And at the end of it, you get a shortlisted group of suppliers that you can then follow up with. Now, I'd love to give you a live demo of the tool, but inevitably on these kinds of webinars, something will break. So instead, what I've done is I've taken a Blue Peter style screenshots of the tool, and I'll talk you through how it works and give you a bit more of an illustration with some screenshots from existing expressions of interest. So in the example on the screen, I've taken, quite literally copied and pasted an opportunity I found on OJEU for a multi-storey car park for the Cambridgeshire NHS. In the tool, you create what's called a work package. So in this work package, I've created a name and a description of what that work package is. So this gives information to the suppliers you will send it to about what it is you are looking for as far as that project is concerned. What you can then do is you add a contract value and an expected start and end date for that particular project. So you start providing information to the suppliers around what it is that they are looking to respond to. Then you start selecting the specific work categories and locations. Now, one of the things that we've done to simplify this process is where we have about 3,500 work categories, we've then grouped those work categories into more logical tags. So in this example, I've found the tag for car parks because the opportunity I was creating was for a multi-storey car park. Now, what you can see on the screen is this car park tag is made up of 13 separate work categories, and not every single one of those work categories is going to be relevant for your project. So you can unselect any that are not applicable. This is really around time saving, so you don't have to try and find all 13 related work categories. We've tried to save you that time in grouping those in a logical way. Once you've selected the location and the work categories, you can then start to get an idea of the number of matched suppliers. So in the example that I put together, in my initial search, I matched with 183 suppliers. So this is in the Cambridgeshire, sort of very wider Cambridgeshire area that have car parks as a work category. You can then add additional suppliers. So maybe you have suppliers that don't necessarily fit car parks. Maybe they have something else. You can add those suppliers into this group that you're going to share this expression of interest to. You can also include or exclude those suppliers. So for example, if you have a competitor in this list, you can unselect them so they don't receive your expression of interest. Now we can go one layer deeper. So let's say 183 suppliers might be a few too many for you to send to. You can then start to filter down that list. So you can adjust the criteria, for example, to specify a certain level. So maybe silver or gold. In the screenshot I'm showing, what I've done is I've selected suppliers that have an SSIP of some description. What I've also then done as I scroll through is I've reduced the range down. So by default, the range is quite a few hundred miles. I've reduced my location to within a 42-mile range of Cambridge. And what that's subsequently done is it's reduced the number of suppliers I've matched with to potentially a more reasonable number of suppliers. So in this case, I've got 24 suppliers I have matched with that have a work category under car parks that are within 42 miles of Cambridge and that have an SSIP of some description. Now, once you've published that opportunity, the suppliers will receive an email notification. Once they're able to log in, they will be able to see the expressions of interest that they have been shared with and then respond accordingly. So in the example on screen, this is a real screenshot from a supplier that's received 4 expressions of interest, and they are able to respond either that they're interested or not. And in this example, of the 4 expressions of interest this customer has received, they have said that they're interested in 3 of them. You can see that through the thumbs up. What you can also do as a supplier is drill down a little bit further. This isn't really enough information for most suppliers to make a decision about whether they're interested or not. In the drill down, they can start to see more of that information. So the work description that you provided earlier, the start date, the contract, all of that information is found as they look at the details, and they then respond accordingly. They can also comment in their response. So if I've seen responses, for example, where someone said they're not interested and they've said, we want to work with you in the future, but at the moment we've got too much work on. So you'll be able to see those comments. Now, with all of these expressions of interest, there's a close date. So once an expression of interest has been published, you can specify how long it's open for, and the suppliers will then have a limit to how long they have to reply. It does not matter at what point of that journey the suppliers say they're interested. You will be able to see live who says they're interested, and you can see the date that they have said that they're interested. So the screenshot I've put on the screen is from a real expression of interest. It's obviously only a subsection of it, and you can see in the bottom right hand side someone has put a response. So they're interested and they've added in a response. So you can start reaching out to those interested suppliers right from the moment that they respond. You don't have to wait till the very end of the expression of interest to start responding to those suppliers. But once the expression of interest has closed, what you can then start to see is some analytics about the EOI. So how many people have you sent it to? What has the response rate been? What's the subscription level? So you may not specify a particular subscription level or size of company, but the report that we give you, the analytics, you can see the breakdown of those suppliers and how they've responded. You'll probably spot a lot of grey boxes. This is just redacting some of the private information from these suppliers. Now, right now, this is a fairly new feature. So we don't quite yet have the awareness across the entire customer base to expect the expressions of interest. But even so, right now, we're seeing about an average of 22% of the suppliers who receive an expression of interest will respond, with about 17% actually saying that they're interested. So what that basically means is if you are publishing an opportunity to 100 suppliers, you should expect to get about 17 interested suppliers. That will very, very much vary on the type of project, how niche the work is, and how many you publish to in the first instance. But it's a good thing to bear in mind, depending on how many you would typically send a tender to, it gives you a bit of a steer on how much you'd need to adjust the criteria. So where we've been talking to customers who've published expressions of interest, we've tweaked, maybe we've expanded the range, the location range a little bit, and we've tweaked it a little bit so that they send it to more suppliers from a wider pool. Now, there are definitely some tips that I'd like to share with you now around how to publish good expressions of interest that will yield better results. So the first thing you want to make sure is that the title of your project, the title of your work package is really clear and really engaging. It has to be the explanation for what that project actually is. It's a little bit like the subject line of an email. In often case, that is the reason why someone opens an email or not. So the title's got to be really, really clear. When you publish an expression of interest, you have to make sure that the description covers all of the key points that a supplier may need to know to decide whether or not they can do the project or whether they want to do the project. You want to be clear, you want to be concise, but you also don't want to put too little information. One supplier I was recently talking to told me that they just simply don't take on any projects that have a single stage design process. And what they told me was they wished more companies would put that information in their initial expressions of interest, because they wouldn't, first of all, waste their own time going through the EOI, but in some cases waste the other company's time in responding to the EOI just to find out that it's a single stage design process, which they don't do. The thing I have been recommending is, if you think about the criteria you need to know about a project before you agree to take it on, make sure you include that in your description. In the very first instance, when you publish an opportunity, the radius is set quite high. So you definitely want to make sure you adjust the radius on your location. The location is set based on either the area of operation for that company or their headquarters or the different offices that they have. So you want to adjust the radius on the location. Make sure you adjust the work categories. You want to stay fairly broad so that you get the widest pool of suppliers for the work that you want, but you also don't want to go too narrow. So make sure you do adjust the work categories. That's really one of the key criteria that we use to match the suppliers in that list. Definitely put a contract size in your project. Don't just put 0 in there, because what that's going to do is it's going to exclude the suppliers who definitely can't deliver on that work. So I've spoken to suppliers who only deliver quite small contracts, and I've spoken to others where they have a minimum size for their contract. So to avoid wasted time across the board, include a contract size, even if it's an estimated one. It can really help to filter out any unnecessary suppliers. Be prepared to close the EOI early. So you can specify a time frame for how long you want to keep that open. But if you do find you're getting too many responses, close it early. We've had an example where one of our bigger buyers was a bit overwhelmed with the responses, and they found it would have taken them too long, so they closed their EOI early. We find most responses happen within the first 2 to 3 days, and anyone that doesn't respond within the first 24 hours, we will proactively reach out to them to let them know that there's an EOI. So we have a dedicated team within my department that will reach out to the suppliers if there is an expression of interest. So there is a level of proactivity, but still be prepared to close it early if you need to. And the final tip is check the final list and remove any suppliers that you don't want to receive your EOI. You don't want to be sending it to your leading competitors. You also don't want to be sending it to suppliers who you may have worked with in the past that maybe didn't deliver on the project in the way that you were hoping for. So do a final check of those suppliers and just remove any from that final list so they don't see what projects you've got coming up. Now let's assume you found the suppliers you want to work with and you have your existing supply chain and you're now in a position where you need to start managing those suppliers. This is one of the other challenges that I hear about quite often is how do I manage the suppliers? And what we really mean, certainly what I really mean when I'm talking about managing suppliers is managing the risk that they pose to you. I'm not talking about contract management or payment or anything like that. That's not our area of expertise. But I'm talking about the risk they pose to your projects. You know, if they're on site, do they have insurance? Do they have up-to-date health and safety? Are they legally allowed to be on site? Do they cover all the legal UK bases to be on site? Now, most of you will be using Constructionline because one of our larger contractors has required you to be at a certain level to deliver on a project. Now, they have made a decision for themselves that that is their risk policy and that they have a business reason for requiring that particular risk level. Now, they don't do this because they're trying to make your lives harder. They do this because they are managing their risk and making sure they comply with UK law. They also do this because, just like you, they want to make sure they select and continue to work with suppliers who are not going to create problems for them in the long run, who are the least risk to them as a business. Now, some of you may already have a defined risk policy or pre-qualification policy, but some of you do not. So I'm going to briefly touch on the most common ones that you're likely to see within the industry. And you may already be familiar with these. So the first one is PAS 91. This is the equivalent of Constructionline Silver. This stands for the publicly available specification, which was originally commissioned by the government back in 2010, really as a starting point to address some of the challenges around pre-qualification and the duplication of effort within the industry. Now, in more recent times, the Common Assessment Standard, or CAS, is really the evolution of PAS 91. It extends beyond the PAS 91 requirements and has been led by Build UK in conjunction with the main assessment bodies, so ourselves, Constructionline, CHAS, CQMS and Achilles, as well as many of the main contractors have been involved in defining what the Common Assessment Standard is. And it's really just making sure that there's a minimum criteria set for that pre-qualification of suppliers. Within the Common Assessment Standard, you've got desktop, which is the equivalent of gold, and you've got the on-site Common Assessment Standard, which is, for us, it's Constructionline Platinum. And then from a health and safety perspective, you have SSIP, which is the equivalent within our business for a claim. Now, a claim is included as standard across all of our membership. So it doesn't really matter what membership level you're at, you will have access to a claim. Now, many of the leading contractors have adopted the Common Assessment Standard as their standard. And if you are delivering any projects for those primary contractors, more than likely you're already at either gold or platinum level. And it makes sense that the subcontractors that you then subsequently employ to help you deliver those projects are also audited to the same standards as you are, because this starts to mitigate the risk across every layer of the supply chain. So even though there may not be you may not have a specific requirement for the common assessment standard, if you're delivering a project for BAM, you're more than likely going to need to be gold. Now, it may be the case that some projects that you have, CAS might be a bit too high of a requirement, in which case bronze or silver will probably be sufficient for your particular risk level. Or maybe if you work within facilities management, there are some dedicated facilities management schemes that we also run, which I'm not going to talk about now, but that are much more dedicated towards facilities management. And having a policy is really important to help you source those suppliers and really to hold your existing suppliers to a high enough level. So if you're auditing yourself, if you're managing your compliance to a high enough level, why wouldn't you want to do the same for the people that deliver work on your behalf? And ultimately, it's really about mitigating the future problems and delays and injuries that might happen for your projects. There's really nothing worse than someone getting seriously injured because of a lack of due diligence on your part in vetting that organization. And really, that's why we have a risk policy, why we recommend everyone has a risk policy in place. Now, I'll tell you a story. I was speaking to a customer who told me that a few years ago, they didn't have a risk policy. They really weren't doing their due diligence when it came to managing their risk. And somebody was fatally wounded on site. And after the investigation, what they found out was that individual did not have appropriate health and safety training. And the supplier that they'd subcontracted to hadn't put the appropriate health and safety training measures in place to make sure that the people that worked for them were safe. And these are measures that 100% would have prevented that death. Now, this really is the worst case scenario for many of you, but before this, the customer didn't have a risk policy, and that was the driving point for them to make sure that they put in a risk policy, which in their case was Constructionline Silver with an SSIP, and they require any supplier on site to be verified, not just to have it, but to be verified to Silver and have an SSIP. And if anyone becomes unverified and they stay unverified for a bit too long, they will simply stop working with them and they will find an alternative supplier that is going to stay verified. You know, those unverified suppliers for them pose a huge amount of risk. And so it's really important that you manage that and you do that before one of these worst case scenarios happens to one of your projects. Now, we do have a solution to help you manage those existing suppliers and stay on top of whether someone is verified or not. And using our supply chain tool, you can create groups of suppliers, or we call them segments. Now, these groups are logical groupings. For example, it could be by project, it could be by region, or whether or not they're approved suppliers or not. You can organize the segments however you wish. You can then specify a risk level for each one of those segments. So what level do you require them to be? So let's say, for example, you wanted them all to be gold. You would be able to see of the group of suppliers, how many of those are verified to gold or not, how many are still silver that will need to upgrade to gold to meet that requirement. And then you can choose whether or not you make that segment visible to the suppliers. Now, some of you I know already have the supplier functionality, so you likely will have seen the buyer connection screen when you go in to manage your compliance. This is directly linked to the supply chain app. So when you create when somebody creates a segment within the supply chain app and they make it visible, what you as a supplier would see is the buyer connection in the managed compliance area. So in this example on screen, this particular company is linked to Newcastle University and Vinci. And in this case, the requirement for Newcastle University has not yet been met. And they would need to potentially upgrade to a different level, or potentially just answer, make sure that they get themselves verified. You probably have already seen this if you've gone into to manage compliance, but if you haven't, I'd suggest going and having a look. And those of you on the webinar likely already have access to the supply chain app, so you can start creating segments of your existing suppliers even right now. Now, once you've added suppliers to the segment, you can then start to get a real view over the overall compliance level. Now, I've taken a screenshot from a real segment of a real customer, and you can see a huge wealth of data about the supply chain, whether or not they're verified, when they became unverified, which specific question is unverified. You can also view how long they've been with Constructionline. You can also even see things like their financial health. So ultimately, what this is really giving you is a view over the health of your supply chain and where you may need to step in to manage your own risk. If you have a high number of suppliers who are unverified or maybe pose a larger financial risk, you can use this tool to help visualize that more easily. Now, this is just a screenshot. There's a lot more layers of this, but for the purpose of this webinar, I'm just keeping it fairly simple. Now, I've covered a lot of the ways that our functionality can help to support those challenges, and I've gone at a fairly high level. The team of customer success managers that are within my department can go through a live demo with you. So if any of you want to see this in action, you can go in the platform yourselves. There's nothing stopping you doing that right now. But if you want to have someone guide you through that process, one of the follow-ups that we're going to do is to share a link to a booking page where you can actually schedule some time with your customer success manager, and they can run through this with you live, and they can set up an expression of interest, add customers to a segment with you. Now, just to summarize what I've covered so far in this webinar, I've touched on the key challenges when sourcing suppliers, particularly where it comes to wasting precious time. And I talked about how Marketplace Publish can really give you back that time through the power of the existing network we already have and the existing information we capture from those individuals. And then kind of covering the importance of having a risk policy. So it's great that you source these suppliers, but how do you manage them ongoing? How do you manage them long term and make sure that whilst they're on site that they are compliant and they're not going to pose you and your project risk? And then I finally covered managing risk with the supply chain app. So this is the setting up those segments. So that's everything that I'm going to cover on this webinar. I can see that there's definitely been a handful of questions. If you have anything that you want to ask, please pop it now into the Q&A. We've included the success email on this screen. So if any of you want to email us directly, you don't want to pop it in the chat, please do email us. We will redirect those emails through to your customer success manager. And as I said, we are going to send a follow-up with this recording, the slides, and an FAQ and a link to that booking page. If any of you want to do a deeper dive into anything that I've covered today, you'll be able to talk to your customer success manager. That's everything from me. The marketing team, is there any questions that would be worth me answering for the group?
No, there's nothing specific that came through, I don't think.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the warm weather we're going to have for the rest of the week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.